Welcome back to the Roads to Wealth podcast. I'm your host, Josh Rhodes. And for today's episode, I've got a special guest for you, John Barrows. John is a guest. It's a special guest in that I've got a somewhat of a unique relationship with him. John actually came and spoke at one of our sales kickoffs with my company. This is 2 or 3 years back now. And since then, I've done a pretty legit job at keeping up with John in several different of his social media channels. He'll mention here at the end of the podcast that he does a great job at responding to really any questions you have on those channels. And I've exercised that a ton. He's helped me in my day-to-day, both in my sales career, as well as just kind of getting my shit together. I was really excited for this podcast, at least releasing it for two particular reasons. One, John in this episode, one of the most motivational and inspirational episodes that I've had. The man is incredible. He's extremely motivating and is got to be one of the hardest workers that I've spoken to. You can literally feel his grit coming through the phone or during this interview. The second is, if you look at a good company, startup or not, if you look at a legit company, a growing company, you'll find that the highest paid people in that organization are typically their best sales people. Okay, this is not a sales podcast. It never will be. Obviously, sales is my career, and I'd love to geek out about things in the sales life. But I do think that this is an opportunity to sort of explore that option if you have the ability to. The sales career can be a lucrative one. It can be an exhausting one from travel and stress. But if you find a good organization, you find a good team, a good product or service, whether it be yourself, right, just selling something that you know, a service that you're able to provide, or you find a product to latch onto, I think it's great. Without further ado, John gives a great little one-liner in here that I'd like to get going into this podcast with. Everyone's looking for a silver bullet, but few want to put in the work. So let's put in the work.
The road to the wealth, I do it for health. For my kids and my spouse, financially sound.
John, here we are, man. I really, really appreciate you doing this. Man, before I even get this started, you're the first person I've been able to interview that I've actually gone through and taking your program and your training and leverage a lot of the shit you teach right out of the gate. I had the chance to run through that program. I guess that was about 2 years ago now, and I still use that to date. So I guess I say that to one, man, I really appreciate everything you did then, still leveraging that today so I can speak on the success. But more importantly, you've kept that cadence with me, and it's how I was able to get this booked is because you've been so responsive. You've helped me with some of the sales issues and questions and things like that. So all in all, man, I really, really appreciate the support and you coming on today.
Happy to be here, man. I appreciate you tracking me down for this. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, I typically like to get this started by getting a bit of your background. Before I even go there, can you maybe just give me a broad stroke of just who you are, what you have going on today?
Yeah, absolutely. So John Barrows, J Barrows Sales Training. We work with a lot of tech companies, mostly SaaS tech companies, high growth, working on techniques and sales training, right? So I'm not a huge methodology guy. I'm more of a tips and tactics and techniques and structure and agile training. Kind of our sweet spot is prospecting and outbound lead gen, but we also work on negotiations and full sales cycle sales. So yeah, I've been doing it now I'm on my own, coming up actually here in February. I'll be 7 years by myself, start my own business, but I've been doing this for about 10 or 12 years now.
Yeah, I'm going to double down on the buy yourself thing. I want to talk about, I guess, how you've gotten to this point, right? Because you're right. You are by yourself. You've been doing this for 7 years. There's a lot of success there. If we could backtrack and let's talk about what's formed John today, if we can. Were your parents entrepreneurs? Did they own their own businesses? Kind of give me the lay of that land.
You look back on the influences and you don't really know which ones had the most but I think my parents definitely had influence, whether I knew it or not, on kind of that entrepreneurial itch that I had. Because when I was born, so I was a kind of a happy surprise. I was 9 years after my sister. So now with a 9-year-old daughter, no person in their right mind would have a child with, a second child with, that much gap. So anyways, when my sister was born, my mom stayed at home. right? So it was kind of typical dad worked, mom stayed at home type of thing. And then when I was born, my mom had actually a really kick-ass job. She has 2 master's degrees and she worked for Wang Laboratories. And at the time, Wang Laboratories was like Salesforce today. Like it was like, if you worked at Wang, it was like, holy shit, you work at Wang. But she felt bad because she wanted me to have the same experience as my sister did, as far as like, somebody there to watch over them and help them grow up and stuff. So at kind of the height of Wang, she quit and she started her own consulting practice out of the house, and which was unheard of at the time. And she was a career consultant, so she helped people get jobs. And I remember we lived in a little split level house, and then when you walked into the downstairs, our living room was our living room and then the office. And I remember we were so cool because we had like a copier, like an actual copier in the house. It was like the coolest thing ever, right? So yeah, and my dad, he worked at MITRE for a while, but then he went off on his own and he started doing consulting for the FAA. So he worked out of the house a lot. I was blessed. My parents took care of me. I was still married after 55 years, actually in January. I went to a decent school, but I didn't know what I wanted to do, right? So I went from majoring in art, because that was my mom's one of her degrees is in art therapy, and she's an incredible artist. And so I was like, all right, I'll try that. And I realized I couldn't make any money doing it. Then I got into like math and science and failed out at all that crap. And then I kind of landed on business and marketing because I figured marketing was really the one that combined all the things I like to do and, helped me figure out how to make money. And my mom said, like, going back to where it came from, my mom said I was oddly always, she says money motivated. I think I was more success motivated. Like I wanted to achieve stuff and money was the outcome of it. But I was very money focused. I always wanted to figure out how to make money when I was a kid for some reason. Yeah. And so I graduated, but I didn't want to do marketing. When I looked at the jobs out there, I just didn't like the idea of being the assistant to the assistant to the assistant, making 25 grand a year at the time, and then waiting for 2 years to get my 2.5% merit raise. And I was just like this. So I got into sales with DeWalt. It was cool because it was like Black & Decker owned DeWalt, and they recruit heavily out of Maryland, which is where I went to college. It was a sales job, but it wasn't really sales. It was event marketing, right? We drove around giving away free tools to construction workers. Did that, loved it, was one of the top reps in the region. Then they promoted me to Home Depot, where I had to sell into Home Depot. But it was a graduation into sales because they already had to buy DeWalt stuff, but I had to take their $10,000 order and turn it into a $50,000 order, right? So end caps, building stuff. Went to Xerox. That's where I got my real formal sales education. After that, because Xerox sales training, second to none, or at least back then it was. And, and selling copiers is, Jesus. If you want to learn how to sell, man, you want to learn how to take rejection, and sell copiers. So I did that, but I just had this itch because it just didn't feel right. I was getting all this smoke blown on my ass, about how great I was at what I was doing. And I just figured I was doing my job, right? And so I was like, okay, fine. Apparently I'm good at what I do. And I talked to my boss and I said, okay, so here's my job. Here's the job that I want, right? So how quickly can I get to that job, right? And he's like, well, you got to spend 2 years doing this, then 2 years doing that, and then you get the opportunity to get that job. And I said, wait a minute. So that kid over there that you have told me sucks, right? We actually go out to lunch and you make fun of that kid. He's going to get an opportunity for a promotion the same time as I am. And he's like, yep, that's the way it works. And it just didn't sit right with me. And then I started to reflect and say, you know what, no matter how hard I work here, I'm never going to move the dial. Me personally, I'm not going to change Xerox's stock price. And if I leave tomorrow, there'll be somebody else behind me that'll be just as good, not as, but whatever, who cares? And so my buddy Chris, who I grew up with in high school, he was like a true entrepreneur. I've moved into being an entrepreneur. I was always more of a traditionalist, where I felt like you had to go get a job, and kind of work your way through the corporate world. This kid, barely graduated high school, didn't go to college. And when I found out he started a company, at first I kind of laughed. I was like, good luck with that. But he had partnered with one of these other kids from my high school who was the smartest kid I'd ever met in my life. And so I was like, wait a minute, there's something going on here. So I ended up, long story short, joining them. And that's where the startup bug just caught me, right? Because I was just like, all right, this is it. But I always said, I'm not a risk taker. Like, I'm not like a full-blown, scratch everything, live on mom's couch, eat ramen noodles type of guy, right? I'm more of a calculated risk taker, where there has to be some pieces in place there before me to jump on board. I'm kind of the second guy, right? Like, if you're the first guy that has that idea that starts the company and he has some traction, you bring me in as number 2 and I will blow this thing out of the water for you. But I'm not going to be the guy that drops everything and goes off on my own. And that kind of panned its way out through where I am today, because sold that company to Staples, got fired from Staples because I didn't fit in corporate, joined Basho, which was the training company that I had taken, right? And I loved this training. They then went belly up. So they then fired everybody. And I've always said, if I'm blessed with one thing, I have a very opportunistic lens. So, I'm not that bright. I'm not a Harvard kid or any of that crap. But with very limited data, I can put the pieces together and make decisions pretty quick. And usually most of the decisions have panned out. And so When we all got fired from Basho, we were about 35 people. Everybody else was freaking out like, oh my God, I got to get a job. And I looked at it and I'm like, wait a minute. This guy just walked away from what used to be a $3 million company with an insane client list and a product that everybody loves, and a revenue stream right there. I'm like, holy shit, who's coming with me? So I jumped on that. Arguably, I should have gone off on my own, right? Just taken that and done a reseller agreement with them and gone off on my own. But I still was a little chicken shit to go off on my own. So I ended up partnering with one of the other senior trainers so that we could kind of have some security, 2 people at least. And then after that, I realized, yep, not even that, right? So then I went off on my own about 4 years after, realizing that partnerships rarely work out, specifically when you do the same role. So I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs listening to this right now. A huge tip that I can have if you're starting a company is I'm begging you, do not start a company with somebody that does what you do, right? I mean, just get a CFO who just handles the finances and, that type of stuff, a sales CEO type of thing, and a technical person. Just make sure you have different skill sets, because if you have the same skill set, you'll tear yourself apart, because you'll always be looking at them saying you can do their job better than they can. That's what happened to us. And then I went off on my own, and now I've been 7 years doing this myself.
That's super interesting. I've heard a couple times, I guess, to echo your point of, if you're more of a software engineer, technically skilled, I'm going to build this thing, partner with someone that's got the sales, marketing, Jay Barrows background. As a sales guru, don't pair up with your best buddy that covers the East Coast and go start your own thing. You're trying to do the same thing, likely with a little bit different methodology, and it's going to cause a ton of friction.
Absolutely.
If I could back up really quickly, you touched on sort of your career path there, and I appreciate it because I had it written down and I was hoping we could go through it. What I didn't understand, or what I didn't know, is, you had pretty serious success in the first 3 or 4 roles, right? You went from this event marketing role, you mentioned your top 1 or 2 in the company. Then you went to this upselling role where it's existing clients. You had to take them from 10 to 50. You went to Xerox, and wow, they, like Salesforce, great training program. They're going to take you from a zero to a hero. What do you think what was causing you to be successful, right? Because I think you said there, you're top in the company and you felt you were just doing your job, right? So what do you think was pulling you away?
I hate to say this, but it's true. I think 80% of this world are fucking sheep. And I hate to say it, but everybody else is looking for somebody else to give them the answer or to motivate them or whatever it is. I never expected that. And I think it was because I was so grateful for what my parents did for me when I was a child. Like, I don't consider myself lucky because I don't believe in luck. I believe you make your own luck. But I believe I was very, very fortunate. Very fortunate to be born here in the United States. Very fortunate to be born to 2 loving parents that supported me. Very fortunate for parents to pay for my college so I didn't have any debt coming out of school. So with that, all of that, like, I looked at it and I said, I saw all my friends, my other friends going through divorce, their parents going through divorce and having to struggle with their way through college and pay, and all that other stuff. And I was like, holy shit, like, I can't squash this opportunity. I've been giving an opportunity and I better not I told my parents, I'm like, once college is over, I will never ask another dime from you. I promised them that, right? I'm like, I'll never live at your house. I will never ask them for another dime. And I don't know. I just think I've always wondered the nature nurture thing as far as drive and passion, because I think that's something you either have or you don't. And I've asked my parents quite a bit, like now that I have my daughter, what did you do for me to give me a drive and a passion and a work ethic, right? It's tough to nail down because I ask this a lot, on my podcast when I do mine. I'm like, hey, what drives, where'd you get your motivation from? And it's, a lot of people are like, I don't know, man, I just was born with this motor. And I always knew and I think it also comes to the fact that I knew I wasn't the smartest kid. I always knew I wasn't the smartest kid in the room. I knew I couldn't control other people and what other people thought of me or what my situation was, but I knew I could control one thing, which was my effort. And so in lieu of any, being the smartest kid in the room or any of that stuff, I was like, well, I'll work you. If I were to look back on it, the entrepreneurial stuff, my parents, my dad worked long hours, they were at the house and I watched them work. They weren't the parents that were, late, even on the weekends, we always, I was mowing the lawn. I had a job as soon as I could get a job. I don't think they were the ones who even told me to go get a job. I think they said, hey, you're old enough to go get a job. But I think I was like, well, I want money to go be able to do the stuff that I want to do. And I don't want to ask it from you. So I'm going to go make that happen. Right. So it's weird because that's the one thing I think is lacking a little bit today. I think millennials get a lot of shit for a lot of reasons. I think a lot of it's based on jealousy from my generation, if you will, from the Gen Xers, because, they have a lot of cool tools now that we never had and a lot of cool opportunities that we never did. So I think a lot of it is unfounded. But I think the one thing that makes me nervous right now, and I don't necessarily think it's just a millennial thing. I think it's a societal thing. I think the work ethic right now, everybody's looking for the easy way out. Everybody's looking for the silver bullet. Everybody's looking for the answer. And nobody really is willing to put in the effort and work to get there.
I wasn't planning on going here, but I think you're onto something. And this is totally out of your control, but out of our control. I had a very similar upbringing in that I think you called yourself a happy surprise. I was a happy surprise as well. When my mother told my dad that I was on the way, he was going to play for the Pittsburgh Pirates.
No shit. Nice.
And he dropped out and he went and worked at a power plant.
Oh, wow.
Very little education and went to work at a power plant. And my dad works at the same power plant today.
No shit.
And so he works hard. And when I think about what drives me and where I get most of when it's time to strap in and do whatever it is, the gritty work of prospecting or follow-ups or reaching out for this podcast or editing stuff, I tap into that thought often of what they and he was willing to sacrifice. And I really sort of tap into that and leverage that on, I would say, on a daily basis. I don't know if that's a characteristic or if you can recreate that, right? Because I'm trying to find how can folks get that fire. Unfortunately, and I think you said, I don't know if it's something you can create. I think it's something you're able to, something along the lines happens to you. And if you interpret it the right way and you're able to sort of reserve it and just tap into it every time you need it, it creates something that you can really, really distance yourself from almost anybody in any skill set by just working hard, But just showing up. I mean, it really is. I don't want to say that easy, but it is. Like, you just show up, you do the fucking basics and you do them well and you try to get better every day, but you put in the work. Like, what frustrates me now. So I do trainings, right? Usually the training is 8:30 to 4:30, right? So that's the full day training. I go on site, do my thing. 4:30 hits, we start wrapping up. I take some questions from people who are out lingering, whatever. Around 5:00, I light up my laptop, check some emails right before I head to the airport for the next session. And when I leave at 5:30 in the afternoon, almost every company that I work with these days, when I leave at 5:30, it's a fucking ghost town. Like, the office is empty. And I'm not saying you have to work. I hate people who just stay late just to stay late to show their face or whatever it is. But like, I wonder, like, if you really, really want to be successful, like, how can you go home at 5:00? Like, do you really get all your shit done before 5:00? You can't do more. I don't know. Like, I'm a huge Gary Vee fan, which I'm sure you are as well. You know what I mean? Like, the whole, work your ass off and stop watching 8 hours of Netflix. Like, you got the time to do it. And to me, it's about happiness and drive, right? I think everybody says, follow your passion. I think that's one of the worst pieces of advice anybody can give, right? Especially to a kid, like in high school or college. Like, are you out of your mind? If you told me to follow my passion in high school, I'd be a stoner on the fucking street painting shit for nothing, right? But what you should do is you should find it. Right? You find your passion. And I don't know about you. I don't know how old you are. I'm 44 now. I didn't really find my real passion until I was in my late 20s, early 30s. I started trying a bunch of shit out and I was like, okay, cool, in my 20s. And then I kind of clicked into the startup thing. I like this, right? And I started to love sales and the difference that it made. And then it started to really take off for me. So the work ethic led to my passion, and then my passion led to the leapfrog of success that after going through, just jobs. I was going to ask you about that. That's something that, as I pulled up, your LinkedIn, when we talked a few weeks back, even as you gave your overview there when you were talking to my company, you have touched, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 businesses, each of them with a different role, a couple promotions in them. Was that done with intention in that you came in, you got some marketing experience, and then you got some channel experience, you got some upselling experience, or are you just kind of rolling with the punches? And at the end of this, you came out of the gauntlet and you've been a just well-oiled, fine-tuned machine. It spits you out the other side and you've got, really all the skills that you need to start building your own brand. Was that done with intention? No, not at all. As a matter of fact, my dad definitely instilled in me was earn it. You know what I mean? Like, earn everything. Don't expect shit, earn it. And so all I did was whatever my job was, whatever I was hired to do, I just did it to the best of my ability and didn't think about the next step, because I always felt like if I did this job to the best of my ability and I was the best at this job, that I'd get the opportunity for that next job. I never looked like, oh, okay, I just got to do this for 6 months. And then from there, I'll be in this role. And then after that, I'll be into this role. And I think that's a big mistake that I think a lot of people right now are way too eager to achieve success, and they're trying to skip a few too many steps. Part of what I do as a trainer, one of the things I love is, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. And so, getting to where I am, and my goal is to share those mistakes so the kids coming out of school don't have to make as many,
but they still have to make them, right? You still got to get punched in the face. You still got to feel what failure feels like. You still got to be able to pick yourself up and holy shit, what do I do right now? I lost that huge deal, or I'm about to lose, miss my quarter. You know what I mean? The stress involved in that, just to feel the pressure of having to put food on your table, those type of things. Like, you have to do that. Like, we're in this Instagram world where everybody puts up this facade of how awesome their life is, but nobody shows you the journey on what it takes to get there. And I think everybody's too focused on that facade, right? Where the joy is in the grind, is in the figuring it out, is in the, in loving what you do, and that's why the other piece of this, when I say find your passion, when you do find it, work is a relative term. It's like, I stay up until 2:00 in the morning. I was up until 2:00 in the morning last night, not because I have to, and, I got to get these things, but, it's because I fucking love what I do. And I'm trying to grind it, and make something out of it and be my own boss and control my own destiny and all those things. And I think it's just critical to make sure that you're pushing, right? But unfortunately, some people are looking for somebody else to push them. That's why what saddens me, for instance, is, the motivational speaking world, right? As a trainer, I have a cap, like I have a ceiling. Like, there's only so far like sales training can go, right? Like motivational speaking, it's a universal thing. And, you look at Tony Robbins, and no knock on Tony Robbins. From what he's pulled himself up from, God bless him, you know what I mean? And what he does for people, God bless him. But it saddens me that many people need to go and have somebody else tell them that they're worth it, that they can do it. They just got to get up and go. That's like another example is like Biggest Loser. Remember that show, Biggest Loser? I think it's actually
yeah, definitely.
When I first saw Biggest Loser, I was like, oh, fucking it. This is stupid. Just another one of these dumb reality shows. But then I actually watched it, right? I'm like, I actually think this show is fantastic. You know why? Because it shows that there's no magic pill. Like, the pain that those people go through to drop that weight, like, that is pain. Like, they are getting pushed to their limits, right? And they drop 2, 3, 4, 500 pounds. And it's not because they took a pill. It's not because they had this fucking fad diet that they went on for, a week or so, or fasted and that type of stuff, or got a cleanse. Is because they got up every fucking morning and they went to the goddamn gym and they sweat and they drip, you know what I mean? They almost passed out, and they just did it. So I actually thought that show was fantastic after really understanding it a little bit more.
I think they're bringing it back. I think you said that, but I think it's on its way back. And what an awesome show. I think her name was Jillian or something like that. Jillian Michaels.
Yeah, Jillian.
Yeah, she was a huge fan of that show. During your growth, you talked about you finally branch off. You've got 2 folks. That didn't work out so well. So you finally branch off and you're by yourself. Even with your background of you've touched and the skill set you've created, going from company like, Thrive in this training program of, is it Basho?
Basho was the training. Yep.
Basho, yeah. Of going from a large company like that to by yourself is, that's a totally different realm. And I don't know if you can fully prepare yourself for that. My question being, did you have some sort of mentorship program or a mentor, or where were you going for your guidance at that point?
Things have, again, I've been fortunate. Stuff's happened to me and I've adjusted and I've made the right decision. And sometimes it's happened to me without me knowing it. I wrote a blog post a little while ago called Stop Doing What You're Supposed to Do. Right. And 2 things that have woke me up in my career have stopped doing what I was supposed to do. One was a personal and the other was professional. The first personal one was when I was in college. I met this girl in my sophomore year, quote unquote, fell in love, was with her for 7 years, moved her to Boston. Right. And she had some issues, but whatever. And after 7 years, like, it didn't feel right. Like, it just didn't feel right. But I was doing what I was supposed to do. Like, after you're with somebody for 7 years, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to get engaged, and then you're supposed to get married. Then you're supposed to buy a house, and you're supposed to have children, right? And even though I knew it was wrong in my gut, I knew it was wrong, that she wasn't the right one for me. But I'm like, who am I to break this off? She depends on me and all this other shit. Thank God she broke it off with me.
No, nice.
She was my fiance, and she broke up with me one day. And I was devastated, like curled up into a little ball, crying in the corner type of devastated, right? But that lasted one day.
That could have been much worse.
And I woke up 2 days later, and it honestly felt like this weight had been lifted off of my shoulders. And I was just like, holy shit, that was the best thing that could ever happen to me, right? And then after that, I ended up taking a turn and finding my wife, and now I'm super happy, right? That was the first one. Then the business one was when my little company, so I went from Xerox to Thrive, the startup. I was the 4th person on board, ran it. And then we sold to Staples. We grew that for 7 years, fastest growing company in Massachusetts, sold to Staples. So Staples bought us, right? For like 6 months, I was super optimistic. I was like, okay, this is cool. Because for 7 years, I had kind of figured it out. Like I had figured out the system with Thrive, like the model. Like I had implemented predictable revenue, like the whole segmentation of roles before predictable revenue. So like we had this scale and it was working. I mean, we were fastest growing company in our space by far. So it was kind of boring after a while because I was like, okay, this engine works. All I got to do is plug in the pieces here. There's no more kind of creativity. So when we got bought by Staples, I was like, oh shit, look at this. This is actually kind of cool. I'm the point person for figuring out how to integrate my little $10 million company into this $20 billion organization. Like, let's figure that out, right? I was super optimistic. And it was when I got reminded that I do not fit in corporate because, we set all these plans and all this stuff. And all of a sudden, they weren't following through on anything that they had said they were going to do, but they were giving me all the shit for the lack of results. Even though my team was actually executing at a higher level than we had before with less resources, their team was doing nothing. And so after a while, I was just like, wait a minute. And I was watching executives and managers like literally do nothing. When I say do nothing, I mean like I would be there for a call blitz with their team and they'd be sitting in their office, like on their laptop playing video fucking game. And so literally like 6 months into this, like just getting a bunch of shit given to me, I lost it. So I was sitting in a boardroom with like 6 or 7 executives and I said that, and they were all giving me shit. And I was like, that's it. Fuck you. I literally just said, I'm like, you're a joke. I don't even know why you work here. Your people laugh at you, that type of stuff. And I walked out the fucking door knowing that they weren't going to fire me because the joke is Staples literally invented red tape. So I knew they weren't going to fire me. So, but then after that, but I still stuck on, right? I still stuck in with that because I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to give up. And you're not going to fire me. I started this company, right? Again, even though I knew it was wrong in my soul, I spent another 6 months fighting this fight of this corporate thing that I just didn't fit into. They eventually fired me. And again, same exact scenario, curled up into a ball for a couple of days, like, holy shit, I've never been fired before in my life. Like, and then I woke up and I was like, holy shit, that was the best thing that could ever happen to me. And then my eyes opened up, right? So I was a little bit of a panic. And this is kind of gets to your question about the mentorship and stuff like that. One of the things, my wife was probably the one who helped me out the most because I was a little panicked. I was like, I've been an IT sales guy for 7 years. Is that what I am? And it was like, and I don't even like computers. So my wife like kind of took me, she's like, well, let's look back at your career and let's say, why were you so successful at each one of your roles, right? DeWalt, like why were you one of the top reps in the region in DeWalt? I love DeWalt power tools. Like DeWalt power tools are badass, right? It's like, so it wasn't hard for me to explain, to talk to people about DeWalt power tools, right? Because I believed in them, right? Then it was Xerox. I didn't fucking like copiers. Who gives a shit about copiers? But I genuinely felt that Xerox was the best company in the copier space, right? And then Thrive, my little company, I was like, well, I cares about computers, but I genuinely believed in the people that I was representing. So it kind of dawned on me that it didn't matter what I sold. It mattered that I believed in what I sold. And then that opened up my eyes to a whole bunch of different opportunities. And that's where I found the training because I had taken it and I loved it. And going back to mentorship, I think there's a false narrative out there that to look for a mentor. I think that's actually a really dangerous thing to tell people to do is go find a mentor because you could find a bad mentor. You know what I mean? Like, and you could have that mentor stigma on you, specifically inside organizations, for instance, right? A lot of people have mentor programs inside organizations with a singular mentor. Like that's dangerous because what if you have a douchebag mentor, right? And everybody in the company knows that person's a douchebag. They're your mentor. And now that's going to rub off on you. So what I think you should look for is people that you admire that are successful in areas that you want to emulate. And that's what I always did is instead of looking for mentors, I look for people that I considered successful. And early in my career, I would always ask to interview them. Any opportunity I had, I would say, hey, can I grab lunch? Can I half hour? And I would treat it like a meeting with a client. You know what I mean? I would prep for the meeting. I would have very specific questions about them and their career, not like tell me about how you got to where you are in your career and that dumb shit, but like, hey, what did that job do for you? How did you make the decision to go from here to here? I just listened, you know what I mean? And I just picked up on, okay, all right, and then I kind of made my own way, right? And so I do have a couple of mentors. I still do. I still go to people for advice. I had a business coach for a little while, and it was a nice way for me to just have a sounding board of somebody to talk to. My mentors are my friends, my colleagues, people I respect in business.
How about to get the ball off the ground and get it up and running? I mean, understanding your primary business today is you're on the road a ton. You're doing traveling. You're in front of teams, individuals and teams, and doing this tactical training that we've talked about. My first question, have you developed, can you maybe talk about the different models or any other avenues that you've created within J. Barrows training? I mean, is there just the on-site piece or I know when I took your training, I had a portal that I was logging into. So what other avenues have you created that's starting to generate some revenue for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've always, ever since Thrive, like my CFO, like the guys who started Thrive, my friends, the two founders specifically, at the time, back when they started in 2000, like most IT services were very project oriented in the sense that, like, so because we did outsourced IT support for the SMB market, right? So companies under 200 employees, we manage their infrastructure, servers, workstation. This was before cloud was sexy too, right? So what happened was, like, most of the IT support those days were buy a block of hours from some little company or a consultant, and then whenever there was a problem, call that person up and they would come run it, right? So it was very break fix oriented. Where Thrive, what they had come up with was no, maintenance. Let's maintain your network. So for $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a month, we'll maintain your network so you don't have these big spikes, and we can be more, all the stuff about proactive maintenance, blah, 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 right? And that recurring revenue model always stuck in my head as far as growth was concerned, right? You cannot scale a company unless you have some sort of recurring revenue. That was always stuck with me. So I've always chased that ever since those days. I've always chased, like, how do you create passive income? How do you create a recurring revenue? I made the mistake early on of confusing recurring revenue versus recurring value. I was trying to manufacture recurring revenue. What I wasn't focusing on was recurring value. You have to have recurring value to drive recurring revenue, right? And I also knew that as a solo consultant here, there's only 365 days in a year, right? And I got to sleep a few days and maybe take a vacation every once in a while. So there's only so much you can make as one person. And I also knew I didn't want to hire a bunch of trainers and build this huge training company and kind of lose control of the content. I started thinking, like, how can I add value to my clients, but also how can I generate recurring revenue for myself? And that's where the online stuff and the scale started to happen. We did it about actually 7 years ago, because my business partner was not on board with it at all. Like, he was the exact opposite. He's a great guy. And he's really, really talented with what he did, but he was a little bit more of the traditional old school trainer, where it's like big brain on Chad, you have to bring me in and I'm the smart guy, right? And you have to pay this ridiculous rate and you can't get any of my content online. I'm not going to share anything with you, that type of thing, because I'm the special one, right? Which is, it's a model, right? I mean, he's made a shitload of money doing that, being that guy for some companies. I was more of like democratizing data approach, like, hey, this stuff is, and I always fundamentally believed also that as a sales professional, because we are the least educated in our profession, right? Like there's very few universities that give sales degrees. They're starting to get there now. But when you come across something in sales that works, it's my belief that if you do, it's almost your obligation to share that content to help elevate this profession, right? If you really genuinely believe in this profession, I believe when you come across something that works, you should share it. So I felt like that. And I just started sharing it with everybody. And that's where I put my online stuff on. And that's where me and my business partner split, because he just didn't fundamentally believe in it. But then now it's, 35% of my revenues. And it's a nice, it's a real good revenue stream for me on top of the on-site stuff.
So out of the gate, when you and your partner broke off, it was just on-site trainings. My question was going to be, how much does it take to get that off the ground? But I mean, as I hear that, the overhead, it doesn't sound like it'd be too ridiculous. I mean, you have the skill set and you've got this portfolio of saying, look, I've driven, here's all the wins I've got and the numbers that I'm looking at. Here's what we can bring to your team. And it sounds like you make a few marketing slicks. Maybe you make an LLC together and then you're ready to rock. Am I missing something, or do you mind maybe walking me through that for a second?
I mean, it's a little, I think one of the things that I did early in my career, I networked a lot early in my career. So I got introduced to networking groups and networking events really, really early in my career, specifically when we were starting, like at my first company, Thrive, like we didn't have any money. We were self-funded, right? So I was the sales, marketing, everything. When I say we didn't have any money, like we didn't have any money. And so, it was not only cold calling all day long and meeting with clients, but I was going to every networking group and every networking event I could possibly get my hands on. And there was this one networking group that's universal. It's still around. It's BNI, which is Business Networking International. They meet once a week and it's usually local in towns and stuff like that. And there's like 20, 30 people and everybody has a different, so you can't be competitors, right? One group and
Oh, gotcha.
And what you do, you stand up, the intro, hey, everybody, give you a little 30-second pitch of what you do. And then you share lead. The leads wasn't, hey, you should go talk, hey, they're doing something. It's no, this person's expecting your call type thing. And their whole mantra was givers gain, which is the more you give, the more you get back, right? So that was instilled in me really early. So early on, I tried to help everybody out. I'd make introductions to whoever I could make introductions for and whatever. And I would obviously take whatever came my way. But that whole mentality of giving, right? And what it did was it built up my networking group, if you will, of the spheres of influence that I had. So when I went off on my own, even like when Basho fired all of us and I started that other company with Kensei with my other business partner, like what happened there was like all of a sudden we were two guys and we needed to start a company. And so it was like, oh shit, what do we do? And I was like, oh, well, hold on a second. And I called up my buddy and I was like, hey, I'm starting a company. Can you help me out? Yeah, John, it's a website. He's like, yep, I'll have that up and running for you, by the end of the week. Don't worry about paying me. Accountant, I'll get you set up with your LLC and all their legal, da, 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 da. And so like pretty much every vendor that you could imagine necessary to start a business, because I had helped them all early in my career, it was like, ding, 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 no problem, John, no problem, John, no problem, John, right? Done. And so within a week, we had a fully functioning website, a business, everything that you could possibly need. My business partner was like, holy shit, man, like what the fuck? Like, how did you do all this? And we didn't, by the way, we didn't pay a dime for it, right? And I'm just like, well, I mean, I'm now cashing in on stuff I had done in the past. And so then when I went off on my own and started doing the online stuff and that type of thing, again, I had some connections. And I think a lot of people again, going back to one of my skill sets is not overthinking things. I'm a very lean startup MVP type of guy where it's like, hey, just get something out there, see what people think of it, make the adjustments to it. Don't spend a fucking shitload of money and then see what happens. And I also use my clients as test cases, right? Because my clients, it's not like I was like, oh, I want this online portal so I can make a bunch of money and never have to fly around again. It was because a lot of my clients, Salesforce specifically, was the driver. Because they said to me, they came in and said, John, we love you like a brother, man, but we're hiring 800 to 1,000 sales reps a year all around the world. And we're not going to fly you all around the world to train every single one of those reps as we hire him. So what other options do we have here? And I was like, well, I've been kind of toying around this idea with this online portal. And they were like, done. Like, yes, do it. So I was like, oh shit, I have a client that wants this. Let me go figure out how to put this all in together. So it was good enough. And, it took off from there.
Before I head there, I want to talk about scale. And I think you're touching on it there. The only, I'm going to put it in quotations, issue I see with this Jay Barrows training is everything revolves around you. The content, you traveling, you're doing the teaching, everything is around you, right? So as you grow, and me knowing you and the content you provided, the sales training you gave, it's top notch, right? And you're not going to let value diminish with the increase of volume of clients, right? So as you're on the road and Salesforce is flying you everywhere and is the online portal the answer, or is the plan to maybe start hiring folks? Like at some point you're going to hit break even or some sort of point there. What then?
Yeah, no, I've already hit it. I mean, like there's two types of companies, right? Like when you go off on your own, right? There's growth companies and there's lifestyle companies. You can't be both. You either invest your profits back into your business so you grow really rapidly, which is most SaaS, right? That's why all their K1s are gross. But so you either do that or you say, okay, I want to live a lifestyle, right? And you maximize profits and you take nice vacations. I started this as a lifestyle company. I started this because I wanted to run my own show. I wanted to make my own money and I wanted to do my own thing. Again, opportunistically, I kept looking at opportunities and saying, okay, let's try to do that. Let's try to do this. Because I always knew I didn't want to just do this, right? Because I'm never satisfied with just being like, okay, this is it. And that's just like retirement to me is a weird concept. Like working your entire life to retire so that then you're happy at 65 and you can do what you want. Are you out of your fucking mind? Like at 65, this body is not going to last. You know what I mean? Like right now, I'm 40 years old. I got the energy. Like I want to enjoy the shit that I'm making. So, I think that for me is really what got me to keep pushing. But the online stuff was my original answer. And then I started to scale a little bit more and see the difference this content was making for people and the impact it was having on the community. And I shifted a little bit to stay with the online, but also bring people on with. I'm pretty selective. I just decided 2.5 years ago to bring somebody on board because really, truly the only way for me to get off of a plane is to get somebody else out there delivering on a plane, right? Because people are always going to want the on-site. I don't care how much people say, oh, it's all online. No, it's not. People want the on-site, right? There's just something about being in a room and getting motivated, doing all that shit. It's all blended learning, right? So you need somebody out there, right? So I saw this kid, Morgan Ingram, who is, really doing a really good job building his personal brand, doing a lot of the stuff that I was training, even though I hadn't trained him. And, my model now is at least my new iteration of my scale model. It's like the 90s rap model, like Dr. Dre, right? Like Dre didn't become a billionaire because he just kept putting out better hits. You know what I mean? Yeah, Beats obviously got him there, but, he became super, super, from a revenue standpoint and money and everything else and successful because he found somebody like Eminem, right? He took Eminem and he put him underneath his wing and he showed him how to play this game. And then when Eminem spun off and did his own thing, he kind of took a piece of that because he helped him get there, right? So my whole thing is I'm not hiring trainers. I'm not hiring sales reps. I'm hiring mini brands that are maybe a few steps behind where I am and don't have the resources or the reputation that I've built mine right now. And so if I can bring those people in, and the whole plan here is 1 + 1 = 3, right? I'm not just hiring a trainer to go out and train. I want to bring somebody who has an audience, who has a point of view, who has content, and then put them into this structure that I've created as far as the online, so I can capture their content on my platform, because the future for me is just-in-time learning. So all these tools out there, right, before, during, and after a sales call, there's all these tools that give us insights and information, but then don't tell us like what I now need to do with it, right? So that's where training comes in. So instead of going through my training and then 2 months later trying to remember, oh, what did John tell me to do at this point? We're going to get to a point where you're about to make a phone call to a CFO. It's stage 4 of the sales process. You're about to talk about pricing. And before you make that phone call, a little video is going to pop up and say, hey, really quick, before you make that phone call, make sure you do X, Y, and Z, right? And right now, there's no consistent way that content is created online. So if you look for sales content, it's all over the place, right? It's some guy standing up on stage for an hour with some crappy video. It's some guy sitting on a white screen, blue screen, whatever. We've created this format where how you put your content and structure it into a just-in-time learning format. So I'm bringing these kids in, put them in that format, get their content. And then if they decide to spin off in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, fine, great. But I still have their content that I can distribute in other platforms.
After hearing it, I'm not surprised, especially after having you on site and listening to all the automation that you create on the back end of your sales processes. I mean, it makes a ton of sense. I guess if I could stay in that same vein, that's definitely a growth plan to answer that question. Are there any other areas or things that you've automated through your process? And I guess where I'm headed with this is you being the big value add. I'm assuming time is money. And so your time, you want to be customer facing or making a video or making some sort of content that could be public facing. Any other time of shooting over follow-up emails, that's quote unquote time wasted, right? So are there any other processes or things that you've done, softwares or technologies you're using, or just anything else you're using to sort of automate your day-to-days or your processes?
Yeah, it's funny. I talk a lot about automation just because that's the world we live in, right? And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give kids the middle ground of using automation for the right reasons, but really doing the work when you should. Oddly enough, as much as I talk about Sales Loft and cadences and, those type of tools and teach reps how to use them the right way, I don't use any of that shit. I send all my own emails. I manage everything through tasks in Salesforce, right? So I'm a very, very task-driven person. What I've done is I've looked for areas where I'm not good at to, I wouldn't say automate, but to let somebody else do, to delegate to. So for instance, my first hire, my COO, right? This woman, Megan, who she has a finance and a legal degree. She had worked at Basho and she was incredible. And so when they fired us and we started Kensei Partners, I couldn't afford her, but I said, Megan, could you just do my books on the side? Because I knew I could do the books and I didn't like doing them and I wasn't good at it, right? So happy to pay for that. You know what I mean? And I wrote a post a long time ago called Know Your Hourly Rate, in the sense that figure out how much money you want to make, figure out how many hours, give or take, you're going to work on a weekly basis, divide that number, figure out what that number is. And then anything that you're doing, if you can find somebody else to do it for you cheaper, just offload it.
Offload it. Yeah, exactly.
Easy examples like, dry cleaning. But it was too expensive for me to go to the dry cleaner and bring my shirts. So what did I do? I ironed my shirts, right? A, I suck at ironing. B, it took me a wicked long time. C, I would usually ruin a shirt or two once a week, right? So I'm sitting there, I'm like, wait, for $1.50, I can have a professional do this and pick them up and spend that time doing something else that can make me money, right? So that's always been my mentality. So I have an outsourced administrative assistant who does all my scheduling for travel and stuff like that. Because again, it's something I can do, but it's not something I should be doing. We offload a lot of stuff to outsourced resources to do data scrubbing and list building and those type of things. I outsource a lot of my marketing and my social stuff to people who can do the stuff that isn't necessarily I have to be the one posting all the time. You know what I mean? I comment and I write almost everything that it goes out there on social, but as far as when it goes out and who it goes out to and all that stuff, that's somebody else's, right? So it's, instead of automation, I think it's more about delegation. I think automation is actually a dangerous thing that, again, it goes back to people looking for that perfect answer, that, the easy way to get 1 billion emails out there so you can get a, response on some piece of shit cadence email. So I actually think we're in a transition world right now where manufacturing was years back, where we're teaching the machines how to do our jobs and eventually they're going to do our jobs. That's why I start off every single conversation with, and you saw it, right, when I do the training, which is death of the average sales rep. Not great sales reps. Everybody says sales is going to, no, shut up. Sales is always going to be necessary. But the average ones, the ones who are going through the motions, the ones who are pushing buttons, asking BANT questions, pressing play on demos, all that shit, they won't get replaced They're just going to get salaried and they're going to put under marketing and operations. They're not going to be sales.
Yeah, man, you spent some time on site talking about that. The machine world could very quickly take over that subpar and even par salesman. If you're taking the entry level call and asking some opportunity level questions, is this real or not, and passing it on, replaced. Yeah.
Replace. You can do better with machines. You know what people aren't talking about enough, I don't think, is they're talking about the automation of replacing sales reps, but what about the automation of the decision-making process? We're going to get to a point where machines are going to start making the buyer decision. You know what I mean? Instead of a person.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, right? Like most of the stuff is commoditized. So if I'm a machine, I can send a RFP out to 50 different vendors, have them all respond, analyze that data, figure out which ones are exactly what I need, and then pinpoint the like one or two that are most optimal, and then do some research on that business to make sure how viable they are. Then go on G2 to double check the reviews and say, fuck it, let's do this one without a person involved. And that's going to happen.
That's scary, man. I mean, scary as a sales guy, just because I know there have been dozens of deals over the last 3-4 years that I've won solely off of relationships, right? And texting the end user, whatever that is.
Yeah.
The final point I wanted to bring up with you, I know in the last 5-6, I think it was September, you had a book come out, another revenue stream. I do want to spend, I know we've got 3-4 minutes here. I want to spend a second on, this is not, I want to be in sales when I grow up. I mean, it's a children's book. It's definitely not your target audience. What was the thought process there?
Yeah, I appreciate it. You know, that's kind of a passion project for me. And, you know, I've been doing this now for 12 years and you know, done pretty good. And, you know, so a lot of people ask, like, when are you going to write a book? And, you know, I don't read all that much. You know, I'm a state school kid, you know, whatever, drank my way through college. So, you know, I mean, don't get me wrong. I read like blogs and stuff like that, but books bore the shit out of me. And most sales books to me are rather offensive because they're like 90% bullshit and 10% legit, but they have to fill it with those other 200 pages so they can sell it for $24.99, right? And so I was like, I'm not going to, like, why? And also, what am I going to write that hasn't been written a million times before? So, but I decided, I was like, you know what? I'm going to write a book here. I decided to write a children's book, and it's called Thank You, I Want to Be in Sales When I Grow Up. And the idea there is, it stemmed from my daughter selling Girl Scout cookies, right? So about 2 or 3 years ago, when she was about 6 years old, she came to me and she started selling Girl Scout cookies. And she said, well, Daddy, you have a pretty strong social media following. So I have this link here, and if you share it out on social, people can buy cookies from me. So could you do that? And I was like, no. I was like, absolutely not. Like, why not? I'm like, because you got to earn that. I go, I earn that audience, and I'm not going to abuse that audience. Okay. So if you want my audience, you have to earn it. And why would somebody buy from you over every other kid that is knocking on their door asking them to buy Girl Scout cookies? And she's like, well, okay, well, what do I need to do? I was like, you got to earn it. Let's put together a little video, right? So we put together this little video pitch. And if you go to iwanttobeInSalesWhenIGrowUp.com, you'll see it. Like, it's her little pitch of why, you know, hi, I'm Charlotte Barrows. You know, I like lemonades and all this other stuff. And then, so that was 1 year. And then the next year, door to door. So I talked to another video of like teaching her objection handling and all this other stuff and intros. And it was just a fun way for me, because I travel so much. You know, I've always found, you know, the struggle that I have with what I do is figured out a lot of stuff. I still got a lot to learn. You know, but one thing I always struggle with is leaving, right? Is leaving my family. I still just can't, that guilt of me getting on an airplane every single week and leaving my wife and my daughter, that is really hard for me to deal with. It's usually about first hour and a half. I don't get depression, thankfully, like real depression, so I don't want to make light of it. But it's about as probably as close to depression as I would get for that first hour.
The shittiest thing, man. I get it.
And so I've always tried to figure out ways of how can I incorporate specifically my daughter into what I do. And so that's where kind of the idea of the book came was, well, hey, you know, no kid ever says, I want to be in sales when I grow up, right? What we're trying to do is change that, because the perception of sales, going back to where the least educated in our profession, well, it's because it's the default profession. Like, people go to school for whatever, and then they get out and they realize they don't want to do it, or they can't make enough money doing it. So they get into sales, then they don't get very much training. And I always say, like, if you take a normal kid, okay, who is honest, doesn't lie, doesn't cheat, doesn't steal, any of that stuff, right? And then you put them into a profession like sales with very limited training and give them a quota and a territory and say, go, and tell them if they don't hit their quota, they're going to get fired and they're not going to put food on their table. You will have normal kids do some abnormal things, right? You will have them lie, cheat, and steal, or, you know, push up to that, you know, tell the customer just enough to get the deal, right? So that's why the perception is so negative. If we address it at a root level for kids and introduce it to kids at an early age and show them that sales is a really honorable profession when done right, then maybe, just maybe, we can start to really change this profession, and they can look at it as a genuine career, right? And so the main priority is to elevate the profession. The other one is to get more women into sales, because I think women are some of the best sales professionals I've ever come across. And that's why it's based on my daughter. And then the third is, you said another revenue stream. It is, but it isn't, because 100% of the profits go to charity. My daughter, oddly enough, funny enough, she doesn't want to be in sales when she grows up. She actually wants to be a veterinarian. And so all the profits go to her favorite charity, which is the World Wildlife Fund. So it's to help animals and everything else. So we're
Awesome,
trying to do some good work out there and cross off a few good feel things.
Sure. I own a couple copies myself. That can be found on Amazon, can be found on your website. For the folks that want to find you, man, just connect with you post podcast. Where can they find you at?
Yeah, I mean, probably LinkedIn's probably the easiest one. Just find John Barrows, right, on LinkedIn. Go to the website, jbarrows.com. That's where you'll find all the social feeds. But actually, I tell people all the time that if you ever want free consulting from me, the easiest way is actually in Instagram, right? So if you go to John M as in Michael Barrows, it's the handle. That's Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat. But if you ever have a question, or if anybody has any questions about sales, hit me up on Instagram, because that's where I can be on this road and just kind of answer your video. That's the easiest way right there.
I've abused you on Snapchat. That is a real offer. John, that's all the time we got, brother. I really, really appreciate you doing this, man. I'm a big fan, continued supporter, and I can't thank you enough, man.
Nice. Thanks for having me on, Josh. I really appreciate it.
For the folks that are listening, as always, I'll take any questions, suggestions, everything else. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you guys. And as always, stay on that grind. Where the hell do I start? I promised you passion, at least energy at the beginning of the episode, and this man brings it. I loved every second of that. Wish I had another 2 hours of it. I have 3 big takeaways here that I want to deliver before I get there, maybe a sub bullet or 2, just because I connected with the episode. There's some relationship here, and I kind of want to unpack some things. First, I relate extremely well, or really tight, to the point he made of he's hyper risk aware. He's hyper risk conscious. I think he said something along the lines of, I'm never going to be the guy that shuts my eyes and bets big, right? Or that goes for it. But I am the guy that'll show up second and blow that thing up. I'll blow it out of the water. I relate to that on too many levels. In fact, I both pre-interview and even as I record this sort of outro here, I still look at it as maybe a pain point of mine, right? I'm not looking for any get-rich-quick schemes. Those that build wealth quickly, those that have extreme wealth, are typically creators, right? And they build things and they exit. And I'm challenging myself currently on becoming more creative, and not only becoming more creative, but finding avenues to create. I'm currently exercising 2 of them. I'm going to share them with you. If you're not interested, feel free to skip ahead. There is a little surprise here at the end of this outro, so definitely hang tight. The first approach I'm taking to sort of exercise my brain is this James Altucher approach. James carries around a notebook, and he writes 10 ideas a day down in that notebook. Times they're generic ideas. Times he'll challenge himself and label them, right? Today, I'm going to focus on writing TV shows that children would enjoy. The following day, maybe it's books that aren't written that nonfiction readers would like to read. Very targeted sort of brain quizzes or exercises. I've enjoyed it. I haven't done anything specific like I just rattled off there, but I have taken more of the generic approach just to sort of track my brain and start to push my limits a bit. The second one, not as off the wall weird, but definitely exercising nonetheless. I'm about 70% of the way through Neville Medora's copywriting course. I'm hoping to get Neville on the podcast in the coming weeks. Now that I'm close to completing his course, I've done his original course, and I'm now just taking all of the extra courses and content and starting to try to write some of my own stuff to get his feedback. It is legit, folks. I'm happy to turn anybody towards that. I believe he'd be willing to hook the listeners up if I got a few folks interested. Anyways, I'm enjoying sort of the brain exercises. If you guys have any recommendations, if you're doing anything funky, I'd love to hear sort of the off-the-wall stuff. That really kind of gets me going. Let's talk about the big takeaways. I have 3 of them for you. One, at the risk of potentially swarming this topic too much today, I love this man's attitude. It is without a doubt his differentiator. I'd go as far as to say it is what's built him the wealth and the success that he has today. It's that chip on his shoulder. I think to his point, it's not something you can just create out of thin air, but I do think it's worth noting, and it's something we should definitely sort of think about and ponder on. I think that point alone is worth sleeping over, or at least sleeping on. The second point I want to give you is this is something that's been echoed now 5 or 6 times to me. Make sure that if you have a co-founder, he's the exact opposite. I think John here went as far as to say something like, please, I'm begging you. And, I mentioned that's been echoed 5, 6 times now, some on podcasts I've released, others on podcasts that'll come out in the coming weeks. I've heard it enough now that I think it's something we should all note, we should take to heart. Going into something alone is tough. I'm not entirely sure, to my point earlier of being the second arriver, I'm not entirely sure I would take on something entirely solo other than this podcast. But if you're going to go into a venture with someone, make sure that you do not share the same expertise. Make sure that it's someone that can supplement you and enhance your abilities, and that you complement one another rather than having, some sort of internal friction just right out of the gate because you're both financial whizzes or both experts in sales or whatever the case is. My final point, and this is one of my favorites, I'm a bit passionate around, it's how he spoke about his mentorships. Don't find one mentor. Instead, find many, reach out to all of them, and extract as much as you can with researched, educated questions, right? You're not asking them, how'd you get there? That is exactly what I'm doing here. I could not encourage you guys enough to do something similar or the same, right? Whether you decide to release it as a podcast or not is entirely up to you, but you all know who the experts in your field or in your vertical are. And to start at the top, start with the best folks in the field and try to sit down with them virtually, obviously, for 15, 30, 45 minutes, an hour to learn from them and do research beforehand. And if they don't respond, then you go to your B-level folks, right? The sort of mid-tiered folks, and interview 25 of them. And then when you go back up to the A-list and you say, hey, I've now spoken with 25 or 50 folks in the industry, and I have some thoughts here. I have some direction. I wanted to get your take on it. At some point, you build the expertise to get their time. I am such a fan of this approach. I'm willing to share any of my sort of expertise. If you want to see the messaging that I'm using to book my podcasts, to get these people's attention, I started from zero background, and I'm happy to help anybody that needs any bandwidth or support there. Finally, I mentioned there's a surprise here at the end of the podcast. John Barrows is an author of a book. It's a children's book. I have 4 copies here in my arms. John assigned them. Obviously, I purchased them where all of the funds and proceeds will be donated to the charity he mentioned here in the episode. I'm looking to give those away. I will have the details of how we're going to do that in my social media this week. Stay tuned for that. I really, really appreciate your support as always. Check me out on all of the social medias. If you have a second, definitely leave me a review. We're making a big push this month as I've found that question around, how many reviews do you have comes up more often than you guys would believe as I try to book some of these episodes. And so I'm sort of eating my own dog food here in that I'm trying to reach out to some of these top folks. Those top folks want results. If you have a second, drop me that review. You can find me. That's info@roadstowealth.com. Other than that, appreciate your time, your ears. Stay on your grind.
So smooth. You know what I'm saying? Q1 made the beat, by the way, just to let y'all know what's going on. Tell them, it's the road to the wealth, yeah. I do it for health, yeah. It's the road to the wealth, yeah. With my kids and my spouse, yeah. It's the road to the wealth, I do it for health, yeah. With my kids and my spouse, yeah. I'm financially sound, yeah. It's the road to the wealth, yeah. I do it for health, yeah. With my kids and my spouse, yeah. Financially sound, you get bad dad. If life about purpose, it give you something to say again. I I've been setting cash goals, financially speaking. I've been finding blessings through all of these demons. I pray to God, I give you something to reach with. See, I give you something to leave with. This life about goals and achievements. Your eyes on the prize, the hate out your mind, and pray to whatever beliefs in. Teach on the way, know that the beach on the way. Gotta shine hard in the teacher's water. Know that little seed, they gon' grow tomorrow. So every day, gotta come with us. So they give you something to stand on. Make the false off when you land raw. Make you put some new friends on. It's the road to the wealth. I do it for help. Yeah. My kids and my spouse. Yeah. I'm financially sound. It's the road to the wealth. I do it for health, yeah. For my kids and my spouse, yeah. Financially sound. You the bad dad.